Hi again then guys, and welcome to another look back into the past of the Forza franchise, once again to Forza Motorsport 4, my personal favourite game in the entire franchise so far. And we're looking at a car which I bring up quite often. It was featured in the top 20 cars which I believe should return to Forza, either in Motorsport or the Horizon games. And speaking of those Horizon games, although we're featuring this car in Forza 4, Motorsport 4 in particular, it has actually lived on in a different form in a later Forza game. Forza Horizon 1 does actually feature at least one version, and if my memory serves me correctly, I think two versions of the Gumpert Apollo. I believe they have this version, the Apollo S, and also the DLC version, I think it was, which was the Apollo Enraged, or the Apollo E for short, which is even faster, more powerful, etc, etc. And that one, of course, is an obvious choice. It's the monster version, whereas this one, of course, you're going to start with the S, just like with my personal preferred track supercar, the Maciel, the MT900. Once again, they went for the S version. It's the obvious choice to go for. It's not quite the top of the tree, but at the time, it pretty much was. Now, in the case of the Gumpert, this is a car which I actually had a false memory about, in particular when it came to its arguably main rival, the Ascari A10, which you guys know how much I love that car. It's one of my favourite cars, always has been, ever since I first saw it, and a fan actually corrected me in a review for the Ascari which I did on Test Drive Unlimited 2, and I'm grateful for that because I always say that the Ascari was quicker than the Gumpert, but it wasn't. That's a false memory, so I need to try and unlearn that because it's been so ingrained with me for so long, but it actually wasn't. The Gumpert was 0.2 of a second quicker than the Ascari. And as much as I want the Ascari to be the quicker car, it makes sense. Of course the Gumpert should be quicker. Look at how much more power it has, for instance. And of course power is not the be-all and end-all. The Ascari, for instance, is a lighter car by more than you might think. The A10 weighs 1,280 kilos, this weighs 1,350, which might sound like quite a lot for a track day supercar. But mostly, if you think about it, the reason why that sounds very heavy is because you're subconsciously probably comparing it to stuff like, say, the Maciel, for instance, or the Ascari to some degree, but not as much, because that's based on kind of the KZ1, an existing car, but more so stuff like the Caparo T1 or the Ariel Atom 500, and of course you can't really compare it to those cars because they're just a whole different level of machine. So as far as track day supercars go, this one actually has a very good weight. It weighs a similar kind of amount to something like a Ferrari 599XX, so when you put it into that kind of perspective, it's actually pretty impressive, especially given how big the Gumpert Apollo is. I've only ever seen one of these in person. It was bright orange, tucked away in a corner at the Goodwood Festival of Speed, and it is a huge car. It's bigger than a Veyron, if I remember correctly. It's such a huge vehicle when you actually see it. It's got a ton of presence, but for me personally, I've never liked the Gumpert as much as the Ascari or the Maciel. I mean, both the Ascari and the Maciel are among my absolute favourite cars, whereas the Gumpert never has been. It's a very eye-catching car and a very cool one, and I have always liked it. I mean, who wouldn't like the Gumpert Apollo, at least to some degree? Even if you don't like the way it looks, you can probably love its performance. But there's just something about it which never quite did it for me in Forza 4 particularly. Because on this game, it never felt fast enough to justify how good this car is in real life. On the game, it just doesn't feel that good. Now in its stock form, if you compare it to the stock Maciel, potentially the stock KZ1R from Ascari, maybe the stock Devon and a couple of others, the Spada Kodotronka even, when you compare it to those in its stock form, it's pretty good, but it's when you tune them that the Gumpert really does lose its edge, and that's a shame, because it's got a whole lot of potential. Now, if you don't know anything about the Gumpert Apollo story, it was designed by, as many great supercars are, one guy with a vision. Roland Gumpert. A lot of people I know don't like the name Gumpert. I think that's a pretty cool name for a car. And he is an ex-Audi, I believe it was an engineer. I know he worked for Audi in some capacity, but I believe it was an engineer in particular to do with the Quattro all-wheel drive systems. So he took all of those years of experience and expertise and technical training and did nothing with it, because the Gumpert Apollo doesn't use all-wheel drive, and as far as I'm aware, none of the Gumpert Apollos, no variation of it has ever used all-wheel drive. And although many people don't realise it, there are actually quite a few different versions. There's the Gumpert Apollo S, which is of course this one, but there's an original version which doesn't have the rear wing. It has a triangular intake on the roof, and I personally vastly prefer that car. That's my favourite of all of the Gumpert Apollos, the original. It has the cleanest shape. That one has something like 650 horsepower instead, but of course it's still brutally fast. Then you have the Apollo E, or Enraged, which is on Horizon 1, which we are going to review in the future as well. Then you've got racing versions that raced on the Nordschleife, I believe it was in the 24-hour race or something like that, a hybrid version. So there are quite a few different variations. There's also, of course, the Apollo Speed, which is what the livery on this car is an homage to, the blue and silver, much more powerful version, which is more geared toward top-end speed as well as being a good track car. So there are quite a few different variations of this essential concept, and that often happens. The Zonda, that same thing happens. The Mosler, same thing. Even the Ascari A10, which came from, of course, the KZ1, and then you've got the KZ1R as well. There are all these different variations of a really good core concept. And as far as that goes, yeah, the Gumpert is a great supercar in the real world. But unfortunately that doesn't transfer over to the game quite as well, at least not on Forza 4, because on other games like Project Gotham, it's rapid and you can get a ton of use out of it. But I don't know what it is about on Forza 4, but to me personally, and I'm sure for some of you guys at least as well, it just never felt quite that sharp. Even when you drop the weight, it's got such a big physical size, it's got almost too much grip, if that's even possible, too much downforce even, and it ends up feeling heavy. Ironically, like an all-wheel drive car. In some cases, the handling is actually strangely similar to the Audi RS6 from Champion Racing, which we reviewed from Forza 3. But overall, it is still a very strong car. Of course, you've got a 4.2 litre turbocharged Audi V8, mid-mounted, rear-wheel drive. It weighs the same as a GT3 car, 1,350 kilos. The power is quite high, 691 is very good. That's more than a Zonda Cinque, more than an Enzo as well. The torque is also very impressive. In fact, the torque is outstanding. 645 pound-feet is way beyond most, for instance, Italian supercars, especially of the time, and the horsepower per ton is over 500, so it can easily challenge a Veyron in that regard. The pricing is also quite good, 320 grand. It's just something about the way it all comes together in this game, specifically, as well rendered as it may be, and as accurate as it may be, it just doesn't feel right for me. It feels too heavy through corners. The top-end speed is severely neutered by the amount of downforce that it has working against it, which is a real shame, because there are other supercars with a lot of downforce, even the Mosler or the Ascari or the Devon, which can go quicker than this. It's a shame, because of course the Gumpert kind of prides itself on how much downforce it has, the whole driving upside down on the ceiling of a tunnel concept, which they're so proud of, and that's a great thing to be proud of. You should be. Having that much downforce is incredible for a track car, but it's going to have drawbacks, and one of those is top-end speed, but also top-end acceleration. So overall, it's definitely a car which is a highlight of the game for sure. It's a car which a lot of people love. Quite a few people also don't like the way it looks. Personally, I think it's pretty good looking, not one of my favourites though. So if you do get the chance to go back, of course it's a highlight, and it's one which plenty of people would probably be, let's say, quite happy to see return, at the very least. But that's it for this pick. Of course, I'll see you guys next time, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.